northerner, you grew up hearing these stories about Mance Rayder. He's the king beyond the wall, and he's the king of the wildlings, and you're growing up, you grow up learning that the wildlings are the bad guys, essentially. You know, there's this kind of endless war going on between those who live in the north and those who live beyond the wall.
I think that the time he spent with Ygritte has primed him to the possibility that there might be more to these people than he thought. Has primed him to the possibility that they might not be what he grew up thinking they were. And he's somebody who was always on the outside in his world to begin with. And he's somebody who's he's never had an unquestioning acceptance of the world he came from, because the world he came from never really accepted him. So I think he's born, or at least was raised, to be open to the possibility that other people might have more to offer than meets the eye.
Why do you want to join us, Jon Snow?
I want to be free.
When he actually meets Mance, he learns that, you know, not only is Mance not villainous, he's actually quite smart, and you know, there's a bit of a mutual admiration going on. I think Mance sees something in Jon that he recognizes in himself, you know, as he was as a young ranger. And Jon sees this man who's actually quite philosophical and has a real strong sense of, you know, what's needed in the coming days and years, and that's ultimately it's going to have to be cooperation, because they're both facing a much greater foe. The real enemy that's out there are the White Walkers, and it's going to be up to Jon, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. It's an interesting position because Cersei is the Queen Regent. You know, she had been queen for many years as Robert's wife, and now she's the mother of the king, but Marjorie is the queen-to-be, and I think there's a real fear on her part that her great power lies in the past, and Marjorie is the future, and Marjorie is much younger, and she's coming in and starting to seduce her son away from her, and Cersei is really threatened by that.
In a way, I think that Marjorie is sort of Cersei 2.0. She's got lots of what Cersei had, and she also has lots of things that Cersei doesn't have in terms of ability to work with people and manipulate people. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that Marjorie genuinely likes people more than Cersei does. And I think that this is intimidating to Cersei in a way, because Cersei, this is one of her weak spots, which she must realize on some level, that nobody likes her very much. And she's owned that and decided she's going to be hated and feared, because being loved is just not an option for her. And seeing somebody who's as smart as she is, as pretty as she is, but younger and also seems to have a real way with other people, that's terrifying to her. And seeing somebody who's able to manipulate her son, who's completely immune to her influence at this point, that's really terrifying, because her son is the key to everything.
I think it's really interesting when you get to see someone like Cersei at a disadvantage, because we're used to her coming in and coolly outmaneuvering everyone else and being one step ahead of everyone else. For me, it's always exciting to find those moments where these characters' humanity glimmers through.
For a great leader who's doing something immensely unpopular for a certain segment, whether it's the warlocks or the slave masters or whatnot, she's creating a lot of enemies, and powerful enemies, and those people are going to try to stop her, regardless of how powerful she becomes. And it's something she's actually, in a weird way, used to, because she grew up with this. She grew up running from assassins with her brother. You know, from the earliest time she can remember, she was being spirited from one city to another, one step ahead of Robert Baratheon's assassins, because there were so many people who wanted to destroy the Targaryen family and make King Robert happy. And now there are assassins out there for all sorts of different reasons, because she's made even more enemies. But I think in her mind, this is just the price you pay for being Daenerys Targaryen, being the last of the Targaryens, and it's not going to stop her. Losing Winterfell, having Winterfell burnt down while he's fighting down south, it just makes everyone question his power and his leadership. You know, if you can't even protect your own home, why would we follow you down south and risk our lives fighting for you if you know, the Starks are clearly not a name that's feared much anymore?
By the time Bolton's bastard got to Winterfell, the Ironborn were gone. They massacred everyone and put the castle to the torch. And Bran and Rickon have not been found.
Catelyn, ironically, very much like Cersei in this respect, her love for her family is first and foremost a love for her actual family, as opposed to the love for the family honor, the family history, the family legacy, the way it is for someone like Tywin Lannister. Catelyn's real response is that she is just pure shock and horror and dismay at the fact that her actual children have, in all likelihood, suffered a horrible fate.
Not only is that difficult, but I think there's a lot of self-blame. I mean, I think Catelyn really feels responsible for some of what happened. You hear that guilt coming out when she's talking to Talise about, you know, the night where she stayed up late with Jon Snow.
I'd condemned this poor, innocent child to a horrible death. All because I was jealous of his mother.
You know, the fact is that a lot of people think she provoked the war between the Lannisters and the Starks by arresting Tyrion Lannister. And on a most basic kind of primal level, she left home and she left her children, Bran and Rickon, and now she knows she's never going to see them again. So I think she feels like she's been a horrible mother.
What are you doing?
Everything that one reads on the subject suggests that everybody breaks under physical duress and under torture and in the face of extreme pain. And they say, I think, but the way in which Theon breaks is very realistic. He tells them the truth, and then he tells them lies, and he says whatever it takes to make the pain that he's feeling stop.
The real desperation for him is just, you know, who are you people, and you keep telling me you want information, but I don't know what to tell you. I don't even know what you're actually asking for, because I'm not trying to preserve some secret. I honestly don't know what it is you want.
Theon has done terrible things, and there's a certain, this is a world in which there isn't really a moral calculus all the time, and the people who do terrible things seem to get away with them and even benefit from them. And although the reasons for it are unclear, as torture is obviously a direct repercussion of many of the horrible things Theon has done.
A hound! A pretty prize, lads. Yeah.
Girl! What in seven hells are you doing with the Stark bitch?
As soon as you're the Stark girl, then you become a pawn in the game.
She becomes valuable, and that makes her life much more dangerous.
Everybody says something, and in her experience, nobody means what they say, and everybody lies, and nobody can really be trusted. So I think she just wants to get out of the situation as quickly as possible.
If we hit the Red Fork, we can follow it west to River Run. My mother grew up there. My grandfather's the Lord. He'll protect us.
And it's just terrible luck for her, you know, because she came so close to getting out of there, and they're actually really not that far from River Run, and it's kind of the great tragedy here for her is that she's so close, you know, she's so close to Catelyn and Robb, and if she could only get there, things would be okay.
Tywin's always been the power behind the throne to some extent, and ever since the death of Robert Baratheon, he's been the sole power behind the throne. But this is the first time he's ever wielded that power in the capital itself. And so, like the CEO that he is, coming to run the company that he runs, he wants to show people exactly who's boss, and he wants to put people off their guard, and he wants to give them kind of a contest between all the players of his council to see who sits where, and I think the way in which they react to it tells him and tells us a lot about who they are.
You know, all the small council members recognize that Tywin is the true power, and they all want to be seated as close as possible to the true power. So Littlefinger, because he's the most ambitious, and to shove his way to the front and grab the seat closest to Tywin. And Varys is kind of, you know, rolling his eyes about that, but he's not surprised because that's Littlefinger. And, you know, from Varys' perspective, it's okay, like Littlefinger can sit closest to Tywin. And Pycelle, you know, just wants to keep on keeping on. You know, he's the Grand Maester, he wants to survive. And then Cersei comes in, and Cersei is just not gonna abide by these rules, you know, so she sees the chair set up, and I'm just gonna drag one right next to my dad, you know, and, you know, screw the rest of you. And then Tyrion comes in, and the question is, well, how can Tyrion, you know, match any of that? And, you know, what we love about Tyrion is he's one of the few players who's willing to stand up to his dad from time to time. And so he's not going to try to sit closest to his father. He's going to sit as far as possible away from his father. And he's going to make such a point of it that he's going to drag his chair to the opposite end of the table and make a joke of it. So I think you see kind of all their personalities emerging in that one dialogue-free moment.
I have dragons. I'll give you one. I vetrasko te pozliwas my zodrize.
You will win the throne with dragons, not slaves, Your Grace. Talise, please.
Dany has her lovable side, but she's also ruthless, and she's also fiercely ambitious. And it's not even like a Littlefinger-style ambition where she's trying to climb, the social ladder. It's almost like a Joan of Arc kind of ambition where she feels like she has this almost divine mission and nothing's going to prevent her from achieving it. And that might mean sacrificing those who are closest to her. Giving away one of the dragons seems like a completely insane thing to do, especially the biggest one. I mean, we know that historically the biggest dragons were this bigger than school buses, and they were weapons of mass destruction and able to lay cities to waste in minutes. And no matter how big and effective your army of 8,000 soldiers is, they're taking even a small city is going to be kind of a dangerous prospect for them. And the idea that she's going to give away what they see as her real future for a chance at a small army now seems insane to them.
Your father, he'd pay your weight in gold to get you back.
You'll be a rich man till the end of your days. Your sons will be rich men and their sons after them. Lands, titles, you'll have them all.
I'm telling to Jamie from the tree. Come on, man.
One of the reasons he's so arrogant is that he was a prodigy, not just that he's the scion of the wealthiest family in Westeros, and which would probably lead to some degree of arrogance, but also he was better at sword fighting than almost anyone alive and became the youngest member of the Kingsguard and was a legendary fighter and champion. And so even if people hated him, they had to respect him because he was really good at what he did. And then he loses that.
Jaime losing his hand is a classic George maneuver, and it was a very intelligent and very interesting move on George's part, because it's killing a person while leaving him alive and walking. It's taking away the root of someone's identity and ripping the ground out from under them and stealing everything that defines them with one chop of a carving knife.
Locke, just sees this arrogant man who's just, everything has always come easily for him, and he's always expected that, if he gets into trouble, his father will bail him out, and he doesn't want to just kill him. He wants him to be aware that life doesn't always work out that way for most people, and now for you, Jaime Lannister. So just as Ned's beheading was a complete shock, I think Jaime's behanding comes out of the blue, and you just don't see it coming until it happens.
The stealing of the sword is in some ways an attempt to see in his delirious, fevered state whether he can do anything with this sword with his left hand, and in other ways, especially once he realizes, which has to be in the first few seconds of holding it, that he can't do anything.
He's such a prideful human. He just doesn't want to exist as a lesser version of Jaime Lannister.
Fighting these guys, it would have been like fighting a group of school kids to him, and now they can beat him down. He becomes like a child to them. They're not so unthreatened by him that they don't bother to really hurt him, because there's no point.
Do that again, and I'll take your other hand.
Fighting is his life. He's the very best in the world at what he does, and now the skill that made him who he was is gone. Whether they were a good person, a bad person, or something in between, you're seeing somebody who is a human being being denigrated, just toyed with in a way that's going to make anybody, including Brienne, feel pity for that person.
You need to live. One taste of the real world, where people have important things taken from them, and you whine and cry and quit. You sound like a bloody woman.
It really takes Brienne to remind him that there's a reason to keep going, and I think a lot of it is because he sees in her example, like she's she's going through a pretty tough time herself. He's almost shamed into regaining his courage by the example that Brienne's setting.
I shall have your head!
The killing of Mormont definitely could not have come at a worse time.
They know that the Night's Watch is in decline. I don't think they realize how far they've fallen, how fast.
Their numbers are not nearly enough. They've lost lots and lots of people in the north, and the one thing holding them together, the glue that inspired them and the wisdom that guided them, was Commander Mormont.
It's not just that Mormont died, it's that he was murdered, stabbed in the back by his own men, you know, and it's been a long time since there's been this kind of dissent in the Night's Watch, and especially with someone as beloved and respected as Lord Commander Mormont, and they found a father figure in Mormont that most of them had never really had before.
We shall never see his like again.
And now his watch is ended.
And now his watch is ended.
Dovageris! Naidon mevatas! Geledis! Zaldrizes guzdaris gosdaor. Valeria munioengos nuihis isa. Dracaris.
We've never really gotten a sense of her capacity for cruelty. She's surrounded by people who are terrible people, but haven't done anything to her personally. And it's interesting to me that as the sphere of her empathy widens, the sphere of her cruelty widens as well.
I think she becomes harder to dismiss. You know, for a long time, people have been saying, even if she was alive, you know, really the only threat she poses is her name. She's a Targaryen, great, but she's a little girl at the edge of the world, so she's starting to knock on people's doors a little bit.
All at once, she becomes a major force to be reckoned with. She spent a lot of time feudally kind of banging her fists on the doors and declaring that she was owed the Iron Throne by right, but now she's stepped into her own as a conqueror.
Dany is becoming more and more viable as a threat, both, you know, in attaining an army and because she's the mother of these 3 dragons who are only going to get more and more fearsome. It just all seems so unfair. You know, everything has seemed so unfair for Arya from the moment that she fled, you know, in King's Landing and witnessed her father killed and then Yoren killed. It's just every time she sees someone who seems admirable, they get killed.
She's not a little kid anymore, and she's had all of that stripped away from her. And this is just another nail in the coffin of her childhood, really. And I think that as dark a place as she is in going into that trial, she leaves it in a darker place.
Arya, don't!
Let me go!
I think she believes it's just really, you know, the strong survive, and if you're not capable of killing your enemies, they're going to kill you, and that's all there is to it. And so the concept that there is some higher notion of justice that's this abstract thing out there that people should adhere to, is she just hasn't seen any evidence that that's a real force in the world. And in fact, the opposite seems to be true, where injustice prevails and people who believe in justice, like her father, are dupes and are going to be betrayed and slaughtered.
Looks like the god likes me more than your butcher's boy.
Burn in hell!
I urged him to surrender peacefully. But the king didn't listen to me. Burn them all, he said. Burn them in their homes, burn them in their beds. I slit his throat to make sure that didn't happen.
I think the great reveal of that scene is that Jaime was actually heroic in that moment and actually was saving lives. And because of his pride, he's never really tried to defend himself. He's endured his legacy being slandered, and that's poisoned him in some ways. And I think it's, you know, it's caused him to become a very cynical figure. And what's shocking is that what comes out is redemptive. I mean, he was acting nobly in that instance and has been condemned for it ever since.
Jaime's always been a fascinating character because he's somebody who starts out in such an awful, seemingly unredeemable place. And by the time you get to this point in the story, you're really starting to see him as a person who's presented with a lot of advantages and also presented with some completely impossible choices that he was forced to make, and that have turned him into that seemingly unredeemable person who you thought you knew at the beginning of the story. And to me, that's one of the things that George does in the books so well that's most interesting, problematizing the idea of good guys and bad guys and refusing to let you rest on your laurels and the assumption that, well, this person threw a kid out a window, so obviously there's not a good bone in his body. And there actually is.
I can't force them to meet us in the field. And I can't attack them where they're strongest. But I can attack them where they're not. And Casterly Rock can't run away. I'm going to take their home away from them.
Robb is starting to realize that if he's going to regain the momentum and have any chance in this war, he needs a dramatic victory. And the most dramatic thing he can think of is take the seat of Tywin's power. Casterly Rock is not defended by a great force, and no one's really expecting him to go there, and it's kind of an audacious plan. But if he can pull it off, he can prove that Tywin is vulnerable and not all-powerful, and really regain some much-needed momentum in this war.
Just as the destruction of Winterfell has a tremendous symbolic weight for the Stark family, so the capture of Casterly Rock would have a huge symbolic weight for the Lannisters.
There is only one person in this kingdom with that kind of army who hasn't already sided with the Lannisters. The man whose daughter I was supposed to marry. Uolder Frey.
Well, I think what Karstark says to him is probably true, you know, in that marrying Talisa was a huge mistake strategically. You know, I mean, for Robb, I think it had nothing to do with strategy. He fell in love with this woman and he wanted her as his wife, and he doesn't regret that at all. But strategically, it meant that he lost the alliance with the Freys, and I think that created a kind of whispering and dissent in the ranks where there hadn't been any before. They saw that their king broke his vows, and everyone knew about this promise, and then he broke that promise. So I think that was probably the decision that has had the most adverse consequences for Robb as king and as general of this army.
Grit is smart. She probably knows what's going on inside Jon and has a better handle on what's going on inside Jon more than Jon does. I mean, she knows that he's, like she says, I know that you're loyal, and I know, and you don't become disloyal to the cause that you've said an oath to and devoted your life to overnight, even when you fall in love with somebody. So she knows, she sees the fence that he's on.
Jon is caught in this horrible position where he has always stayed true to the Night's Watch, to the vows he's made, more or less. He strays from the path a little bit, but this has always been part of Qhorin Halfdan's plan. So I think he's always believed that he's staying true to the Night's Watch and will eventually return to them, but at the same time, he's finding himself in an extremely dangerous situation and an emotionally fraught one because he doesn't want to betray this woman that he's fallen for.
The Night's Watch don't care if you live or die. Mance Rayder don't care if I live or die. We're just soldiers in their armies, and there's plenty more to carry on if we go down.
I think Grit makes things even more difficult for him than Mance Rayder does, because she's someone he's in love with, and he's never been in love with anyone before, and that's a powerful emotion that the Night's Watch vow is meant to keep out of the Night's Watch picture.
Well, it's you and me that matters to me and you. Don't ever betray me.
I won't.
Impossible.
Why?
My grandson is the pride of High Garden. Your daughter
He's rich, the most beautiful woman in all 7 kingdoms, and the mother of the king.
Old.
Old?
Old.
I think Tywin at this point is genuinely concerned with the longevity of his line and the Lannister name. Cersei is still an attractive match in his mind because she's still quite beautiful, and she's still the one Lannister, his only daughter, and she's still young enough to bear children.
And a boy with his affliction should be grateful for the opportunity to marry the most beautiful woman in the kingdoms and remove the stain from his name.
Brothers and sisters. Where I come from, that stain would be very difficult to wash out.
On some level, maybe he knows they're not rumors, and I'm actually don't think that's probably his weak spot. He probably doesn't, probably won't allow himself to admit that there's even the slightest chance that that is really happening. But he knows from a political standpoint that those rumors can be damaging, even if they are false, and he has to do whatever he can to quash them.
And it becomes this kind of just this great back and forth between them because, Tywin points out that Loras is famously not attracted to women. He's saying, I'll forgive that, and you forgive the fact that my daughter is getting up there in years.
They're fighting with words. They're not fighting with swords. It's not two people literally going at each other, but it has the same kind of excitement for me is watching a great sword fight between two equally matched opponents and having no idea who's going to come out on top.
Shall I draw up the order? Or do you consent to this match?
It's a rare enough thing. A man who lives up to his reputation.
There aren't 1,000 blades. There aren't even 200. I've counted.
Ugly whole thing.
Yet it has a certain appeal.
Littlefinger wants it all. He wants the power, he wants the money, he wants the armies, he wants all of it.
I'd say the real epitomization of the motto, long-term greedy, is Littlefinger. He's very, very patient. He's been biding his time for a long, long time to get what he wants, and what he wants is a lot.
And it's impossible for a man from his background to acquire all that without taking some serious risks, because it's just so far to climb.
But what do we have left once we abandon the lie? Chaos. A gaping pit waiting to swallow us all. Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
He's willing to take those risks. Even you think back to season 1 where he's talking to Ned and he's saying, like, this is our chance to strike. Like, we can take power right now. And Ned refuses to go along with it, but Littlefinger was conspiring in that moment and continues to conspire. And like any conspiracy, there's a chance that it will fail.
And Littlefinger's not afraid to take calculated risks as long as he feels he's got himself covered.
Shame you had to settle for your second choice.
Early days, my friend.
It's a real turning point for Robb because he's sitting there in that scene. It's literally like love and death. He's got the battle plans, the map on the table with all of his troops. And then he's got this woman that he loves sitting there on the bed, almost just beckoning him away from this horrible situation he has to deal with.
Despite all the complications that his marriage to Talisa has created, he genuinely loves her, and we have very few moments where we can see the two of them together, so this was a big one for us. And when you have these characters who are so important, and Robb, in such a crucial season for him, sometimes these quiet moments are the ones that are most vital for us in terms of understanding the characters and the stakes here. It's not a scene that has much to do with plot or driving the action forward. It's really about these two characters and where they are right now at this moment and the lives they envision for themselves going forward.
Can you leave the wall for one night?
I love you. Do you hear me? I love you.
It really does start to feel like both his cause and his family have been given a new lease on life, and that things are finally moving in the right direction after he's lost his way, especially the first half of this season. In a way, there's the rebirth of his cause and the eventual birth of his child. I think it's fitting that those two things should be in play in the same scene.
Tywin's the real
power, and pretty much everyone understands that except for Joffrey. And every now and then he needs to be reminded, And Joffrey is still king, so Tywin has to be a bit careful. He can't come right out and say, "Listen, you little brat, I will spank you if you don't listen to me." But he does make it quite clear, as only Tywin can.
But I haven't been counseled.
You are being counseled at this very moment.
He's so commanding, he's such a commanding presence, and can be so intimidating without having to say anything. All he really has to do is march up those steps and loom over Joffrey. And you see Joffrey kind of shrinking back in the throne, and you realize just from that visual who's in charge.
Your Grace.
I have a gift for you as well. Your life.
My life?
And the lives of your wise masters, but I also want something in return. You will release every slave in Yunkai. Reject this gift, and I shall show you no mercy.
Daenerys is coming into her own in a powerful way in this season. She's always been very negatively predisposed towards slavery because she knows what it feels like to be property. She was a very fancy slave for all intents and purposes. She was somebody who was sold to another man in marriage, taken against her will. And I think that her feelings about slavery have started to really inform her reasons for wanting the Iron Throne. It's finally started to occur to her that if I want to take on this responsibility, it's incumbent upon me to do something with it. And she sees this great wrong, probably the greatest possible wrong, surrounding her, and she's decided that she's not just going to take back the Iron Throne because it's her right. She's going to take back the Iron Throne because she is the person to make the world a better place than it is. And she's going to not just take it, she's going to use it for something greater than herself.
The Red God is the one true God. You've seen his power.
He's not my one true God.
No? Who's yours?
Death.
The things that she's seen and the things that have happened to her family have obviously profoundly affected who she is and given her a very grim outlook on life.
Really what she believes is the evidence of her own eyes, and what she's mostly witnessed is death and more death, and everyone she's ever cared about cut down right in front of her, and she's had a grim few years here. So she doesn't believe in much, but she believes in death, and she believes in revenge, and she has her hit list that she recites often, and that's what she's going to pursue. I think Arya is really learning more and more about both fighting but also subterfuge, and so I think she feels if she's going to escape, if she's going to survive, it's going to be on her own. That's the only chance she has, and she sees an opportunity to make a run for it, and she runs.
Unfortunately, she bolts in the wrong direction, and she gets apprehended by someone who is much, much worse than the people she is running from.
Kick all you like, Wolfgar. Won't do you no good.
I think Stannis really has come to rely on Davos precisely because Davos is the only one who's ever answered him honestly, and who doesn't have his own agenda. So even though Stannis really depends on Melisandre for so much of his power at this point, Stannis is a smart man, and he recognizes that Melisandre has her own agenda. She's trying to, she's serving this Lord of Light. She's a religious fanatic, and as much as Stannis has come to believe some of the things that Melisandre says, he's just not a fanatic. That's not who he is.
I don't think he's willing to take the leap from Melisandre has real power, even of a magical sort. Don't think he's willing to take the leap from that into, therefore, everything she says about her God being the only true God and all men must serve him unquestioningly. Like there's a logic gap in there that I think he's unwilling to jump.
I never asked for this, no more than I asked to be king. We do not choose our destiny, but we must do our duty, no? Great or small, we must do our duty.
He places a great deal of value in the words of this one man who's never failed to tell him the truth. Even when it's cost him his freedom, even when it risks his life, Davos is always willing to tell Stannis what he really believes.
But you came to me now before this boy is put to the knife because you knew I'd counseled restraint. You came to hear me say it because you believe it yourself.
There will be no bedding ceremony.
There will be, if I command it.
Then you'll be your own bride with a wooden.
What did you say?
Tyrion has said to Cersei in an earlier episode that he's the one person who tells Joffrey what he really is to Joffrey's face. And Joffrey can't abide anybody knowing what he really is. The reason he hated Sansa Stark is because Sansa Stark inadvertently saw what he really was in the second episode of the first season. And so Tyrion is constantly doing this to Joffrey. Joffrey's constantly being pushed to the edge of kind of mindless, crazy aggression against his uncle, and somebody is always having to kind of pick up the pieces and interpose themselves.
I'm sure Tyrion did not mean to threaten the king.
Causes him to backpedal and take back some of what he said and get out of there with his tongue and his head intact.
A bad joke, Your Grace. Made out of envy of your own royal manhood.
I think Tyrion is conflicted because, first of all, he's getting an enormous amount of pressure from his father to not only consummate the marriage, but to produce an heir. Sansa's too young for him, and I think a lot of what it is for him really is he knows she doesn't want it. What it comes down to is he knows she doesn't want it, that she's dreading this, and he doesn't want to force himself on someone who has those feelings. So despite all the pressure he's getting from his father, and despite the fact that he's probably somewhat attracted to her, even though it makes him feel guilty that he's attracted to her, he's a proud man, and he hates the idea. I think he knows that he would hate himself in the morning if he made her do this thing, and he's not going to do it. And ultimately decides, I'm not going to do it, and I'll wait until she's ready, and he'll wait as long as it takes, which might be forever.
And so my watch begins.
The sad irony of this scene is that it really is about Robb putting the past behind him and about taking the horrible situation with his mother, freeing Jaime, and with having to execute Lord Karstark against his mother's advice, and the situation with Winterfell more than anything, and his brothers and Theon, and all of these things, and somehow getting beyond them without forgetting them, and moving on to the next chapter, and moving on to the task at hand, which is to defeat the Lannisters, to take Casterly Rock, and to force them to a truce.
I think in his mind, they both made political mistakes, even though he's so glad he married Talisa and loves her so much. Certainly, politically, that was a bad move, and certainly in his mind, releasing Jaime was a terrible move. But now it's time to move on because they really only have each other. These are the only two Starks together, other than Bran and Rickon, and he needs his mom's counsel at this moment, and he needs his allies more than ever, and he's got no stronger ally than his mother. And I think a part of him is thinking, well, maybe this is a pretty audacious plan, and so if she says this is lunacy, then maybe it is lunacy. But when she tells him,
show them how it feels to lose what they love,
he feels validated in this decision, and he feels like this is the correct way forward.
He understands that she's afraid, and he knows why she's afraid, and he's right. I mean, she's gone through such hell right from the moment where she saw her father beheaded up until this moment. And she's gone through things that no young person or anybody should ever have to go through, and finally the light is at the end of the tunnel or across the river, as the case may be, and she feels like she's finally can dare to hope for something good to happen to her again. And this is somebody who's gotten so hardened and all but lost any hope that something good can happen to her. She's very wary of letting herself feel too much because feeling too much only leads to pain in her experience.
And she doesn't even want to really believe it yet because it just seems so unlikely that something good could possibly happen to her, because it's been so long since anything good has happened to her.
But then he takes her to the outskirts of the twins, and she sees the Stark banners waving in the distance, and she knows he's telling the truth. I mean, the Stark army is right there. And then she gets even closer. She gets inside the walls of the twins, and she sees Stark men. You know, those are her guys. And she hears those northern accents, you know, that she hasn't heard in a long time. And she's within, 10 yards of safety. And then it all goes horribly wrong. Clearly one of the more important events in the entire series. Everything changes after this point. It's kind of the end of the innocence, it's Ned's death was so pivotal at the end of season 1, and everything changed from that point. And even though there have been many big moments since then, there's nothing that compares to the Red Wedding. So it's all different after this.
This was an event that was not only from the books, but it was one of the primary reasons that we wanted to make this show. We thought that this was getting to the Red Wedding for us was such a major milestone and such a source of trepidation because, yeah, it's a shocking scene and a shocking moment, and it's also completely inevitable in hindsight, which I think is one of the things we loved so much about it from the beginning, and one of the things that makes for so much great drama. I mean, so much great drama and so much great storytelling is completely surprising when it hits you, and then if you go back and you read it again, you go back and you watch it again, you are asking yourself the question, how could I have missed that this thing was coming?
All the clues are there, and certainly you knew that Robb was heading into a dangerous situation, but somehow your guard drops and it looks like, hey, this might have a happy ending. And of course it all starts to change when you hear the Rains of Castamere playing, and you think that's not right. And then it all takes a very dark turn, and doesn't end quickly. It's not all over in a hail of crossbow quarrels. It actually lingers for an uncomfortably long period of time. I mean, that last shot of Catelyn standing there, you're kind of hoping for a cut to black. You just want it to be over because you're watching this woman that you care about so much, and in her absolute, the most horrible possible place, a mother having seen her own son killed before her eyes, and having really nothing left to live for at that moment, believing all her other sons are dead, and presumably her daughters are dead, or at least in the grips of the Lannisters, and it's all over.
At this point, I feel like the world of the show has definitely announced itself as a world where, like in our world, where these horrible things do happen to good people, and the heroes that you want to see come out on top and triumph don't always come out on top and triumph. And I think that it's very much of a piece with the fabric of the show. It's about the cost of honor and the cost of love. Robb made a choice there, and it's taken a while, but he ends up paying for that choice in the worst possible way in this scene. Tywin Lannister is rational, cold-bloodedly rational, but rational, and he's a man who has codes and loyalties to things larger than himself.
I think Tywin's a strict utilitarian, which is the greatest good for the greatest number, but by his version of utilitarianism, it's the Lannister, greatest good for the Lannister numbers, and if he can strengthen the Lannister cause and ensure his family's continued survival and authority by having a group of Starks murdered at a wedding and Stark bannermen murdered at a wedding, from his point of view, why on earth wouldn't I do that?
From his perspective, Tywin ended a war that was going to cost both sides untold suffering and countless lives. Those people who, if Tywin had won the hard way, would have been dead anyway. And now the war is done, and the kingdom can unite itself under sort of a dictatorial piece of the rulership of Tywin Lannister.
Tywin is a man of great pride, and I think every single time he sees Tyrion, it's an affront to his pride. Tyrion, who certainly always knew that his father was disgusted by him in some ways, but I don't think he ever realized quite how far it went. It's one thing to have a distant relationship with your father, it's another to know that your father wanted you dead from your very first day on this earth. Roose is the kind of man who will be loyal to you as long as it's good for him to be loyal to you. But like so many, you read about medieval history, and lords, the allegiance of lords varied wildly. As soon as Roose starts to believe that Robb's not going to win this war, I think he's looking for an escape plan, an alternate route, and also realizing that if Robb were to lose and to die, and the Starks have been essentially wiped out because, Bran and Rickon are missing, presumed dead, and that leaves an opening for a new Warden of the North and possible advancement, great advancement. So instead of having to follow around this young, in his mind, arrogant lord, he could actually be Lord in the North himself.
The idea that we had behind the whole Theon, the arc through the third season, was we really wanted the viewer to be in it with Theon and to not have any idea what was going on. We want people to be confused. We want people to be asking the questions that Theon is asking. Why is this happening to me? Who are you and what do you want? We wanted to push it to the point where it started to seem like, why am I watching this terrible things happen to this person? Because that's what it feels like to a person who's in that situation. And then we find out why, and we realize that this sadist actually feeds into the main storyline that we've been watching for the past 2 years in a very major way.
You see her get her army in episode 4, and here in the finale you see her get her people, really, because she has her Dothraki followers who don't number very many, and then she's got the people she's freed from the other cities, but now at last it's not just, and it's something almost even more religious about it than being just a queen. I mean, she's the mother of these people.
And it creates a whole new dynamic between her and the people that she's fighting for, that she's going to have to deal with in the future.
The way they treat her, the way they lift her up, and she is something that it's a revelation from a prophecy, and that glorious destiny is coming true.
Here it seemed like it was really important to let us know just how many people were counting on her to see the full extent, or mostly the full extent of her army, and the tens of thousands of people who flooded out of these gates to pay tribute to her. And then keeping the dragons in play, because they're always such an important part of her identity, and we just wanted to tie all of that together in one great shot. This is a show that couldn't have existed until 4 or 5 years ago because of the visual effects requirements.
Season 2, everything was building towards Battle of Blackwater, and so all our resources were saved really for that. Season 3, I think it's more evenly spaced, where you have the Plaza of Pride, which is a huge set piece for us, the ice wall climb in episode 6, the fight with the bear in episode 8, Samwell versus the White Walker.
This is the biggest year for visual effects, and the story sort of allows for that, and it gets bigger and bigger in terms of the scope and in terms of the visual effects.
The show keeps expanding and breathing more deeply. It's always fun and exciting to see what else they've created, because, most of the real work happens when we're not here.
It's been really a year without a break, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of hours, but it's the greatest gig around.
The biggest challenge for visual effects for the whole team of Game of Thrones in season 3 was just the size of it.
Every single season, there's a wealth of new challenges. You're never doing the same thing twice. We're perfecting what we've done before, but we're building on that and also always introducing new elements to the story.
First time you've seen a giant, Jon Snow?
Shooting Dany on this ship was really exciting. It was a huge animated world. We had a beautiful ship that Gemma Jackson built for us, and then everything else was up to our visual effects team.
For Dany's boat sequence with the dragons, we sit down and say, okay, what does everybody want for this sequence? Then we go to previs, and we start lining up all of our cameras on the actual boat that we have modeled in the computer to match our set. And then using digital cameras that match our real cameras, sets that match our real sets, we block out all of the action for the whole scene, where the dragons need to fly, how the actors need to react relative to the dragons, what the camera angles and lenses should be. And then from there, we go on set, we mock up everything we did in the computer on set on the actual day with the actors, with the full crew. And then we take all of that, go into post, take our plates, and then match what we planned in the first place with previs.
The dragons now are the size of swans, so they're huge. We get to watch them frolicking, we get to watch them fishing. Dany interacts with the dragons.
It's really hard sometimes to work with an actor who is having to interact with a creature that isn't there. And so we try as much as possible to give them something to play against, to give them something to look at and to touch.
On set, we use a green tennis ball on a stick. It's the standard way of getting eye lines correct and interaction. And I tend to puppeteer that myself because I sort of pre-perform what the dragon's going to do. And also, you have to help the actor feel as if they're interacting with something and they're not sure what it's going to do. So I push against Amelia's hand a little bit, or take it away, or nudge her, or just do little things that I would imagine a dragon would do. And then she interacts with it. And we also have rubber stand-in dragons that are roughly the right size, roughly the right color.
It's strange. I genuinely can't explain it, and it's kind of I'm a little bit odd, I think, in my just connection with them as stuffed and animals for the CGI. The models go away, and I still kind of definitely feel their presence, which is quite lovely.
The dragons of season 2 were babies. We put human ages on them, so if the dragons of season 2 were 5 years old, the dragons of season 3 are 16. They're sort of starting to come into their own. They're starting to show off for their mom, and they play, they joust around, they guard. We added some features to the dragons, some fins. They can bulge their eyes out. They can push their teeth out like a shark. The chest inflates. They have a lot of real-world features that they employ if they sense any danger.
What our supervisor Joe Bauer did for season 3 was come up with some ideas based on nature, where you look at an animal and imagine what kind of threatening posture it might have.
We look at Komodo dragons. We look at really every lizard-like reptilian thing on the planet. So everything we do is based on reality.
You look at an animal and imagine what kind of threatening posture it might have. And so you'll see in the dragons for season 3, they have a real developed threat pose. This season we have a manticore, which is sort of a scorpion-like creature that threatens Danny at the dock in Astaport.
This little girl appears who just seems like a little girl playing, and she has a little ball. She rolls it for Daenerys. Daenerys picks it up, and suddenly this cowled figure comes in and knocks the ball out of her hand. You think, what the hell's going on?
When it opens up, this deadly creature shows itself, and so that'll be a completely CG creation, and it was designed mostly by the art department.
So they took my 3D model, sent that, just emailed it to America, and this is called stereolithography, and it cuts out the exact form of our 3D model. So this will be painted up so all parties concerned know what this thing's going to look like.
We used it on set as the eye line and also as lighting reference when we were shooting the practical stuff, and then the vendor built it out, and we did the same photo research that we did with the dragons, looking at beetles, bugs, anything that has sort of an exoskeleton, and settled on a June bug predominantly, because the way the light sheens and the iridescent quality of it, because it's supposed to be from magic, the reason it exists. So it should have a familiar but also an otherworldly quality.
One of the interesting creative challenges of season 3 was to put together what does it look like when a White Walker dies, when Sam stabs the White Walker with dragon glass. And one of the ideas was that he would instantly freeze over, and that frost would travel across the front of his body, emanating from where he gets stabbed, and that would reveal that he is ice. And once he becomes fully frozen, that he would then break up into ice chunks that would drop off him and ultimately turn into frost and dust that would blow away in this gust of wind that would be brought in with them.
Visual effects are very important to Game of Thrones, and visual effects fall into 2 categories. I think most of the viewers understand the dragons, the direwolves, some of the more spectacular things that we do with visual effects. But also what visual effects does time and time again is to add scope to the show in much more subtle ways.
There's a lot of times where we do have massive sets, but they're not as massive as they look. And a lot of sets after 20 feet or so, they'll end, and then we take over everything from there. We want to show the scope and scale of the show, and we do that with visual effects, and those are the most seamless effects throughout the show.
The creative process of coming up with a castle is to really start with what is the location and what is the feeling we're supposed to get when we see it. Just like we did with Dragonstone, like we did with the Red Keep, like we did with Harrenhal.
The first episode, we meet Robb Stark and Roose Bolton and Robb's entire army coming to Harrenhal. And Harrenhal has a great history. It's really old, as so many things are in Game of Thrones, but it's the only structure that was destroyed by dragons. So we researched volcanic activity and saw how rock melts. And so we made it look as if it was destroyed by dragonfire. And then it's been inhabited a number of times since then, so the walls are being held up. It's sort of makeshift attempts to keep the whole thing from falling apart.
Last season we were quite familiar with Harrenhal, we were introduced to it, so we were trying to maintain that sense of scale that we had and the austerity of Harrenhal, and you know, this is like quite a functional, scary place really, so it's kind of fitting that, you know, we stumble on this massive bear pit.
The bear pit we built after a huge amount of conversation how the hell to do it and where to put it, and we really only had that one courtyard for Harrenhal.
It had to look like it had been there forever, and it had to sort of look like it was made from gnarly wood, and you know, it wasn't polished. From a scenic point of view, that was quite a tricky one, I think, to pull off, because it had to be structurally safe, but at the same time it had to look like it had been there for a long time.
Then of course it had to be built in a fairly regular way, because we're going to have to shoot some of the aspects of that back in Los Angeles with the actual bear.
The actors were not allowed to be in immediate proximity with the bear because that was not really a safe thing to do. So we built a bear pit in Belfast, an identical bear pit here in LA, to be able to replicate a lot of the shots and to be able to keep the extras from Belfast in the LA shots. And so it was always going to be a big visual effects scene, but it became even more visual effects intensive.
For the bear pit scene, we used every trick in the book. We used green screen. We shot Jamie and Brienne in front of green screen. We shot the bear in front of green screens.
You also have to take into consideration the requirements of the bear. The set in Belfast is actually an oval set, and it's enclosed on all sides. It's a pit. Well, the bear cannot be confined in a 360, so we can only have half the set in Los Angeles.
Using clever cinema tricks, you can put together a scene with 2 actors and a bear in an environment that's shot in several different places, in several different ways, on several different days.
We're taking it to King's Landing.
For King's Landing this year, it was easy to make it look a little bit different because of the Battle of Blackwater. So we built the same towers, but we damaged them and we charred them, and we're far enough along in the story that they're rebuilding. So we researched medieval building techniques, and there's actually a lot of research and a lot of illustrations about how they would have rebuilt these things. And so digitally we just duplicated that.
The Sept of Baelor presented a bunch of different challenges. The design of it was that it be the most colossal cathedral that had ever been built, and we shot it on a fairly small stage. We had to extend it using set extensions, and we did that with green screen, and we allowed the cameras to keep moving so the directors would be able to sweep through it and have a majestic kind of shot. And we tracked those shots and created a background for them that was a CG model that tracked with the cameras and extended the set in every direction.
Before we knew what it was, we only knew that it had to be amazing. We knew it had to be the biggest structure in the show's mythos, at least to this point. And as big a stage space as the show has to build in, we could only afford to build one small pie wedge. There are 7 enormous statues that are much older than the structure itself. So the history is that the statues were carved, a millennia ago, and then moved into this giant structure that was built much later. So it's very much like Egyptian artifacts that you would find in Rome.
It's like taking a walk through history.
And then we get to Astapor and Yunkai, and Astapor and Yunkai are in Slaver's Bay. Slaver's Bay is seaside, it's rich, they're trading cities, they're port cities, and they had to have a very particular look to them, but at the same time they needed to look like sister cities, and one of the tools we used to tie them together was a bit of the architecture, has a similar look to it, but also it has a very iconic harpy that lives in the structure of the city that brings them both together.
Astapor has a gold leaf harpy, and Yunkai has a marble harpy, but they're basically the same shape and size. So Dan and David thought it would be nice to make a shot that lets us know the geography of Yunkai, because as a rule we only are looking up at it, and so a lot of it is hidden behind the big outer gate.
Dario and Jorah are about to go into the city and have their battle. They're outside the gates and they're talking about what they're setting up to do, but we needed a shot that said, here's where they are, here's where they're going, and here's how impressive this city is.
We decided to put big bonfires on either side of the marble harpy on the roof of the pyramids that are the highest points of Yunkai. So the camera flies over that at night. It's all torch lit and moonlit, and you just see this enormous cityscape of adobe buildings.
For Astapor, we'll be using locations in Morocco and enhancing them and creating the city of Astapor where it doesn't now exist.
Well, what's great about Essaouira, where we are now, this is where Astapor is located. So unlike some of the other locations, a lot of what Essaouira is will be what Astapor is. You know, the seawall, which is several hundred years old, which exists here. You know, it looks like an effect when you see it, but it's actually real. So we've designed sort of a new city, a new old city, which we're putting in.
There's a lot of crowds, and as you can imagine, with 8,000 Unsullied following Dany out of Astapor, those crowds will be visual effects enhanced in a big way.
We've got a big set here in Morocco, which is the Plaza of Pride. We have her addressing all the slaves and the whole kind of thing with Grazni and the dragons, and it's got to feel absolutely mammoth, huge, huge, huge.
It looks unlike anything I've ever seen before. It's majestic, and it's just, the scale of it is ridiculous.
Everybody wants to see the dragons do what they can do, and this is, in episode 4 is the first time that Drogon, which is the main dragon, the black dragon, sort of the alpha of the three, is set loose as a weapon.
What we try to do is be as photorealistic as possible, and that starts with using real photographed elements. So when Krasny gets it, and Drogon is in the corner of the screen and we're kind of over Drogon's shoulders, he's about to blast him. What's really been photographed is a stuntman in a fire retardant suit being blasted by a flamethrower.
To create Dragonfire, you work with somebody like Stuart Brisden, who's our special effects supervisor. And when you mention fire or burning anything to Stuart, he gets a slight little, the teeniest, tiniest little glimmer in his eye, and you know that his brain is going like this.
We've been using the chain for the dragon rig. So the idea is the dragon's on the other end, but obviously we haven't got a dragon, a real one. So we've built a rig that will hold up the chain, and we can move the chain around and shake it around so that it looks like there's a dragon on the end. And we add on to that a fire rig, so we have a flamethrower on the end, basically.
We also shot a bunch of practical fire elements with Stuart with the same rig, and then we comp those in. But we've sort of avoided CG fire because we just don't think it looks quite as good.
We're doing an explosion on top of a wall with Dany standing in front of it, about 40 feet in front of it, so it's very controlled. It's a very safe explosion. And we have 4 explosions that go off in a row, so 1, 2, 3, 4, just to create a massive fireball, just to back Dany, really, to show she's got the power.
And then the other part of what we did was take the 400 costumed extras and turn them into 8,000. We determined that we needed a camera at 200 feet so that we could shoot the big exit shot. So we wanted to be up high enough so that we could see inside the plaza, over the walls. We wanted to see 4 big columns of the Unsullied exiting. We wanted to see all of Astapor. We wanted to see the destruction. We wanted to see the shoreline, the waves crashing. And we wanted to see the dragons enter in the foreground in the air, flying over. So it's a lot of stuff to cram into one shot. Probably the hardest thing to achieve was climbing the ice wall, because aside from 30 feet of it, it didn't exist. And we had the actors interacting with it nonstop, and it's a long sequence. It's almost 200 shots.
It required more resources than almost anything else, and more planning than almost anything else, and more work after the fact than almost anything else. This is probably the most visual effects intensive scene we've ever had. I think every shot is a visual effects shot.
It really started with previs, where we sat down and tried to figure out if a batch of people are going to start climbing this ice wall like they're climbing a mountain. How do we physically do that in a way that makes sense for production, that tells the story, that communicates the peril that these guys are in?
For the ice wall, you know, it all starts with having the proper set, which is this 32-foot wide, 50-foot tall, massive set that the actors can really climb, stunt guys can really climb. And then visual effects picks up with, you know, there'll be wires that everyone has to have for safety. And we'll take out all of those wires so that way people don't know that they were suspended while they're doing all this. Then for every time we shoot off the set, you know, we extend the ice wall indefinitely into the distance. But what really helps is to have that real wall on set on the day, and then we match to that and just make it larger than you could ever really build.
We've had to build it, which has been huge, and sculpt it, which is essentially polystyrene, and then it gets plastered, then it gets painted, and then it gets covered with wax, and then it gets painted again sometimes, and then more wax, and then we build up the layers. So you get a lovely feeling of the colour, just very sort of, just like in real ice. It isn't, so it's not like slapped on the front. You sort of get it quite sort of ghostly feel to it.
Yeah, the wall climb was amazing. Yeah, I thought they'd build this kind of 10-foot high plastic wall that we'd have to go up and down 20 times to make it look like we were climbing a lot. But actually they built a 50-foot high plaster and polystyrene wall that we could actually dig real ice axes into and dig our crampons into and do, you know, proper climbing. And it always, again, amazes me with this show when you turn up and they've built something that incredible.
The wall was an experience that I don't think I'm ever going to be lucky enough to get again in my life. It was fantastic. The wall it's plastic, but it had like a waxing cover. And so every time that you buried the axe, it made a thud sound as if it was ice. Like, it was incredible. And so yeah, we just kind of climbed. And with the men down at the bottom, they were brilliant. They kind of like helped us with the wiring. So you looked like you were nimble when you were climbing over it, when really we weren't at all. And then the wind machine would start blowing and the ice machine would start blowing. And so we'd be kind of like 30 feet off the ground. And it's not very high, but kind of like when you're up there and there's only a mat below, you're kind of looking down and you're like, holy crap.
I've been a competing climber when I was like 20 kilos and 20 years ago. So I have the techniques in my blood, but I really had to do a lot of training to get back the strength. And when you're doing takes after takes after takes, you have to really keep your muscles warm.
It was grueling. It was really hard work. It was like physical and with the wind and the snow machine in your face. And yeah, that was done over, 6 days, I think.
Got them loose!
Our realm tournament decided they're going to cut Igra and John away, so we devised a system dropping the stunt doubles and catching them from below. When we did the actual drop, they actually caught on secondary lines, so they never actually hit the ground.
When you're in a visual effects review where you're toggling between where you're at with the final shot and what the original plate looked like, what the original footage looked like, it's really satisfying to realize just how far it's come from a bunch of people climbing against a green screen on a white textured wall.
I think one of my favorite visual effects shots of season 3 is when they're on top of the wall at the end of episode 6.
By the time they get to the top of the wall, the sun comes out. The director of photography, David Katz-Nelson, lit them with this gorgeous kind of a peach-colored light. And the set was a certain size for the top of the wall, but obviously it needed to go on for miles. So that was all a green screen stage shoot. and we extended, set off into infinity, really.
And we get that look just straight down the wall, and we see the depth of it and the vastness of it. It's quite a beautiful moment. The final shot of season 3 is Dany is embraced by the now freed slaves of Yunkai.
The final shot needs to not only end the episode, but end the series, or the series for this season. So Dan and David felt that this sort of needed to encapsulate everything that Dany has achieved up to this point.
We usually start every season kind of knowing where does each character end their journey for this coming season, and we always felt this is where Dany ends her journey, and it's such a powerful image that it felt like this was the appropriate image to end the season on.
We start on Dany, the dragon flies past her and out of the shot, and then the camera cranes up, and it just keeps going up and up, and you see, all of the Yunkai slaves, a huge mass of thousands.
We shot a lot of different elements of the crowd of thousands of people around her from a very high construction crane shooting straight down, so that we have these tiles or sections of crowd from very high up and shrunk down so that we can put them and paste them all around her.
I feel like the idea was to really give us a sense of the scale, the size of the stage that she's playing on, just how many people were counting on her, and then for keeping the dragons in play because they're always such an important part of her identity, and we just wanted to tie all of that together in one great shot.
We see the 8,000 Unsullied all in their formation, and we see Yunkai looking down from above, and we see more slaves pouring out. And then ultimately Drogon re-enters the shot, flies up and right past camera, and we cut to black.
I think the expectations are very high for season 3. I think we fulfilled them. I think one of the reasons we've been able to attract all of our department heads and most of our crew time and time again is because of the new challenges.
Watching it actually unfold on screen and seeing these sequences ended up being even better than I had it in my imagination. So it was one of the really most fulfilling moments working on this show.
The production schedule was really challenging and very demanding, but everybody just brings their heart to it. It's a labor of love.
It's all fun. Everyone loves it. Everyone watches it. For somebody who does what I do, it's a feast, And everybody who's involved in it is excited to be involved in it.
The show wouldn't exist without these guys, and we're lucky to have them.